by the chair and
Hello and welcome to another edition of Shaka Extra Time. Joining me in studio is Jacques Ali himself, the host of Straight Talk Africa. Hello, Shaka.
Hello, Paul.
Good to see you.
Good to see you too.
How are you?
Man, I can't keep up with you. You keep, for some reason, you keep somehow bringing out some incredibly gorgeous, fashionable shots.
I'll take that as a compliment and thank you so much for supporting my Indiho collection. A warm welcome to all our Facebook followers and watching us live. Shaka Extra Time is a show that comes to you every Tuesday, and today we'll be talking about a wide range of issues. But I guess let's start in Egypt. Shaka, 24 teams played this year in the Africa Cup of Nations. We are down to two teams, that is Algeria and Senegal. Your thoughts, Shaka?
Algeria and Senegal, it's very interesting because one of the two teams that you mentioned, Algeria, has won it all before. It has kissed it. It has kissed the trophy, the golden trophy and all kind of stuff. But guess what? Senegal has never had the opportunity to kiss the trophy, even though at one time it was one of the most highly ranked football teams when it comes to the World Cup, the beautiful game.
Shaka, you've been around for some time, and over the years you've observed some of these teams that make it to these finals. What is it that people should be looking for, or what makes these teams stand out?
To play as a team. It's not, at that level, it's not about the individual really skills and shining and all that kind of stuff. It's those 10 people plus the goalkeeper 11. They have to be playing like a team. If they can play like a team, share the ball and what have you, and look at some of the great opportunities that appear here and there and take advantage of them, at the end of the day, they will be laughing and celebrating and probably drinking champagne, or share, as they say, in our neck of the woods.
How about if I was to borrow maybe the American phrase that people play on a team, but at the end of the day, it's the individual that wins, and we've seen it. We've seen this happen over and over again. Take for example, whether basketball or soccer, you have some very incredible players on that team, but only one person gets to be celebrated. And in this particular case, you have some players who stand out, who have been playing, let's say, outside of their home countries, playing in the European League, in other leagues. So what could be different this time around?
I mean, that is very true, but let's face it, someone has to be able to supply the ball to you. Someone has to identify you that you are strategically, for example, located, positioned, and all that kind of stuff, and give you the ball. And then you obviously cannot allow any margin of error. You have to put it exactly where the ball is expected to belong. I mean, I remember, for example, there was a time when Liberia had one of the most incredible world-class football players by the name George Weah, who happens to be the president of Liberia as we talk. Yes, he could do all sorts of things. He had deep pockets. He could pay his colleagues and what have you. He could fly them here and there. They could play. But you know what? Like I keep saying, as an individual, you can run very, very fast, and maybe you can score. But together, we can go very far. So at the end of the day, this is not an individual sport. This is not about Edwin Moses running 400 meters hurdles in 1976 Montreal Games where he ended up breaking Ugandan John Achibua's Olympic and world record of 400 meters hurdles. This is teamwork. It is a team. You have to play together. You have to be there for each other. You have to hold each other's back. That is the only way you can drink champagne or obshera.
Interesting. So any expectations?
Well, to be very honest with you, I would, my heart tells me that it should be Senegal at least getting an opportunity for the first time to celebrate that almost important, championship. But let's face it, we are talking about Cairo, and we're talking about Egypt. And you know the politics of this world. I remember one time I was in Cairo, and at the time, Egypt had in fact been the Africa soccer champions. And this guy was telling me that he had just come from Africa. He had actually come from Nairobi. Then I said, wait a minute, what are you talking about? You just come from Africa. Where are you? I thought you were an African. And in fact, I thought that you also were in Africa. Because let's face it, who is the Africa soccer champions? It happens to be a name called Egypt. And you're Egyptian. And you're saying you just came from Africa? So I'm saying those dynamics could probably work in favor of Algeria. See, the same neighborhood and what have you. So it's quite possible that one could look at it as Algeria having some kind of, advantage in terms of location and geography and the cultural dynamics.
Shaka, you bring up a very interesting point here. There are a lot of critics who say that when it comes to playing in the name of Africa, the Arab nations, Arab African nations, when it's politically expedient for them, they become Africans.
When they need the votes, for example,
Absolutely.
At the UN or at the African Union and stuff like that, yes, for example, you remember in the 90s, Africa had complained so much that since the founding of the United Nations in 1945, there had never been an African to occupy the top executive job, the UN Secretary General. And guess who actually ended up taking that honor? Dr. Boutros Ghali of Egypt became the first African UN Secretary General.
Interesting.
Until later, of course, what the Americans did with their veto power and stuff like that, they decided to deny him the second term because they said rather than act as a secretary, he pretty much acted as a general. And of course, then Kofi Annan of Ghana, the Ghanaian, in a sense, became actually the first African, even though you could have to qualify that by saying perhaps the first black African Secretary General to occupy that 38th floor office in Manhattan.
Let's move along. Let's cross over from Egypt. Let's go to the most southern part of Africa, South Africa. Interesting developments there. Let's maybe start with a comment from... let's first talk about President Jacob Zuma, former president of South Africa, testifying in a corruption at a corruption hearing. This is something that cast a dark cloud over his presidency while he was president. But not only did he testify, he's also alleging that there are people out there who are out to get him. They are actually threatening his life and that of his family members.
Are we talking about corruption hearings, or
yes,
is it something that is called state capture?
Well,
or both?
A combination of both.
The Guptas.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm. Very interesting, but you are looking at democracy at work. And South Africa, I have said it before and I will say it again. I think when you see how things happen, how things are done and what have you, you would have sincerely, to find it difficult not to identify South Africa as perhaps the beacon of African democracy right now. And when you talk about democracy, democracy is largely premised on accountability. It is premised on social, economic, political justice. It is premised on fairness. And so I think it is incredible and it's great that we are actually having this type of hearings in South Africa.
Right.
And that you should also give credit, for example, to Jacques Zuma, otherwise known by his clannish, romantic, beautiful name called Mushorozi. He was able to be recalled by the ruling African National Congress to leave his job as president. And he accepted, though grudgingly, he accepted and stepped down. And he's now being taken through what they call accountability. But we have to give, I think, credit to Thabo Mbeki, his predecessor, who was initially recalled. He could have decided perhaps to behave differently. He didn't. He felt that the country was more important than himself as an individual. And so he decided to respect the decision made by his party, the ANC, and stepped aside, paving way for Jacob Zuma to become president. And so I think we are seeing very interesting dynamics in South Africa. This is, in fact, should be an example, frankly, for the rest of the continent, because at the end of the day, you need a society that is based, ruled based or governed based on democracy, on socio-economic, political justice, on a society that aspires towards equitability. I think South Africa is making Africa proud so far.
How would you respond to critics who say that what Zuma is facing right now is a taste of his own medicine? He engineered what got his predecessor out, the person you just referred to, Thabo Mbeki, but now he's going through a similar thing. The only exception is that he's actually physically appearing in front of a tribunal.
Yeah, he did, but let's face it. First of all, he's going through the process. Others might call them, of course, going through the motions and all that kind of stuff. Ideally, in a democratic society, Paul, one is innocent until proven guilty. Whereas, on the other hand, in a democratically challenged society, or in a dictatorship, one, in fact, is guilty until proven perhaps innocent. But in this particular case, you really have to be patient. You have to wait and see at the end of the day what will be the outcome of these hearings or the due process that is underway in South Africa.
How about two quick responses from one, Almini James? He says, power corrupts absolutely. And another one, Gerard Zung here. If politics is about uplifting lives of the underprivileged, why are most elected leaders in Africa getting richer while the poor are getting poorer? In the context of Jacob Zuma, for example.
It is very, very sad, Paul, because let's face it, when you think about Africans who are well off, those who have, for example, what they call deep pockets, those who have, for example, millions and billions of dollars in Swiss bank accounts, in offshore accounts and all that kind of stuff, sadly, when it comes to Africa, these are the individuals that also actually happen to hold political power. These guys have no factories. These guys do not create jobs. These guys, all they do is simply to tap into the national resources, national coffers really, They just keep recycling and all that kind of stuff. In fact, it reminds me of a story about Nigeria. There is this lady whose name is Madueke. She used to be the Minister for Petroleum. You cannot believe how many or how much US dollars this woman supposedly spent on buying, for example, watches, earrings, and all that kind of stuff. And this woman claims to have actually gone to school. She went to Howard University, nearby here. She went to Cambridge University in England and all kind of stuff, only to learn really to be a thief, a very big thief. You're talking about Nigeria, where probably millions and millions, tens of millions of people actually hardly can get one meal a day. No guarantee of a meal. And you have this lady who actually had $35 million apartment in Abuja, the Nigerian capital. For what? You know, there is a saying that when you think about it, when you look at a country, you look at a continent, you look at this world that we live in, that there is in fact more than enough for our needs, all of us. But unfortunately, there is not enough for the greedy, the guys who are very greedy. Maybe we should arrange with NASA so that they can collect all these greedy people and take them to an as yet explored or discovered planet.
Shaka, how would you respond to Amina, who says going to school doesn't mean one can stop the habit of stealing?
Well, you're right, except that, in fact, going to school perhaps also contributes in the sense that it probably exposes you to the extent that you can actually develop this habit of consuming. Most of us, what we have actually ended up learning is to be consumers rather than to be producers. What we actually need is to learn how to produce, to create wealth, and to be able to reflect our traditional African cultures of being there for one another, reflecting what is considered to be essentially an extended relationship, which is really the African way. But when it comes to the control of the state, the people that control this thing called the government, they are very greedy. They basically end up, in fact, being patriotic to their stomachs, the stomachs of their families and friends, and not the people.
But Shaka, how would you maybe respond to another criticism here? Not everybody who steals belongs to the government. We had, for example, here, blue-collar crime here. It's one of the highest crimes in this country. And even in Africa, most highly educated people tend to use those skills they acquired from schools or universities to do certain things that are not, by any measure or standard, acceptable.
For example?
People stealing. You've heard of Madoff, who stole people's money because he was able to play on their weaknesses and said he was going to invest money for them.
But in a way, you are not really contradicting me. You're probably making my point, except that when it comes to Africa, mind you, the state, the government, is the single largest employer, the single largest contractor. Not so, for example, in developing countries. For example, here, individuals are probably even much, much richer than those people that are elected to control certain state budgets and what have you. But at the end of the day, I think we need to be able to make sure that we have systems that allow us to choose those who actually govern us. And that those who govern us must reflect, for example, the importance or values that make them, frankly, be men and women of character and integrity. Not necessarily that they have such and such a certificate, a diploma, and all that kind of stuff only. No. Not that they have, they are members of some religious affiliation and all that kind of stuff. No. Character and integrity are very, very important in terms of public service. And they have to be willing to be there for each other. They have to be looking at a society whereby they put society, they put their countries above their personal, political, for example, interests. At the end of the day, it's about service.
Yeah, you are watching Shaka Extra Time, a show that comes to you every Tuesday. And here in studio, I'm joined by Shaka Ali himself. Shaka, before we leave Nigeria, let's go to another comment here from Felix. What are the best ways to combat insecurities in countries like Nigeria, especially in light of what has been happening there? Not only do we have Boko Haram in northern and eastern parts of Nigeria, but we also have Fulani herdsmen fighting communities who are looking. This has been going on for a while, and something has to be done for it to stop. In fact, one of the former presidents, Olusegun Obasanjo, was quoted by the local and international media. They are saying that if the issue that is going on, if it's not addressed, I mean the Fulani fighting the local communities, it's going to spill over. Maybe it could end up being a genocide like what happened in Rwanda. Your thoughts?
You see, first of all, I think that we need better governance. We need men and women, again, of integrity. Men and women that have character. Men and women that are interested in bringing people together rather than dividing them, either along sectarian, ethnic, or political differences. When you talk about insecurity, you talk about Boko Haram and what have you, some of the researches that have been done, and I have seen the data and all that kind of stuff, it's largely because some of the, for example, the efforts or some of the solutions that are being brought about to address some of these problems are essentially focusing on symptoms, not the essentially what you would call the fundamental root causes of the problems. You talk about the Fulani. You're talking about the Fulani, but really it's not about being Fulani. It's about the mode of production. You're talking about people who look after cows, cattle, sheep, goats, camels, and all that kind of stuff. What it means is that their cows, their goats, their sheep need to have unfettered access to water and to grass. Without that, there's no livelihood. And at the same time, guess what? You have these societies which depend essentially on tilling the land. And so you really have a conflict between the two different modes of production. You have the pastoralists, as I said, who obviously need to have access to the two very important things, water and grass. You also have people who are in the business of cultivation and who in fact feed countries and societies and stuff like that. They are good guys. They have to be able to protect their crops and what have you. So governments should really come up with some sort of creative solutions here. Figure out not necessarily how to favor one group over the other, but rather to bring these two different groups that reflect different types of modes of productions, figure out together how to share and all that kind of stuff.
Shaka, you bring up a very good point. Maybe let me follow up. These ethnic clashes are not just happening in Nigeria. We've seen it happen in other countries. For example, in Congo, in 2000, end of 99 to 2000, I covered a massacre in Congo where the Hindu and Hema militias massacred each other, and thousands, thousands were killed over a similar situation where the Hema pastorates are moving around with their cattle looking for grass and water, and the Lendu are technically agriculturists or farmers. So they were fighting over the same resources. Should it really be about death?
No. Again, like I said, there is more than enough really to go around for our needs if we were ready to be sincere about life. What we are talking about happened in neighboring Rwanda. It happened between the Hutu communities and the Tutsi communities. No one talks very much about the pygmies, the Batwa and stuff like that. But everybody is a human being here, and every life is very important. The conflict between the Hutu and Tutsi in Rwanda, I actually sum it as the conflict between the cow, for example, and the hoe. The cow representing the mode of production of the Tutsi, the pastoralists, the nomads, you know, who go around and stuff like that. Who again, because whatever they have which takes care of them and they take care of it, has to have unfettered access to the same thing that also the other community needs to have unfettered access in order for their crops to mature so that they can eat and have have a good life. So at the end of the day, we need to address these issues equitably. We need to make sure that we lift everybody out, not put any particular individual, community or group down simply because they may not look like you, they may be shorter, you are tall, they may be fair-skinned and you are dark, they may be Catholics and you are a Protestant, or you are a Muslim, or whatever. It's about life. We all belong to God, and we need to be there for one another.
Very briefly, what are you talking about tomorrow on Straight Talk Africa?
Tomorrow we are going to be actually looking at the political developments in the Sudan. You know, last time when we talked, they had actually cut a deal, agreed to share power. The military junta and the opposition political groups had agreed to be part of the Sovereign Council to share power equitably in a way that can help to bring about peace and stability in their beautiful country of Sudan. So that is what we are going to be looking at tomorrow.
We'll see how that holds up. Thank you so much for joining us today. Shaka Extra Time is a show that comes to you every Tuesday. Again, we look forward to hosting you on another edition of Shaka Extra Time. Thank you so much.
You're most welcome, sir.
Yep.